it always sounds silly when a backyarder says it, but he said, I feel like we've got some good wrestling minds here, and we can do something here. Let's just give it a crack. Even if it's just one show and we do the one show and then nothing else ever happens, we'll always be able to hang our hats on the fact that we had a crack and did that one show. And that show ended up being Awakening in November of 2001.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 55 Live podcast here in conjunction with the WZWA Network. I am one of your co-hosts, Karlifornia Infirri, and at this time I'd like to introduce my other co-hosts, Mr. 55 Live, Jack Wallace. Jack, how are you doing today?
Very tired. We stayed up very late last night with WCW commentator Scott Hudson. I'm exhausted, but you know what? I'm actually very excited for this chat as well. We've been doing this all weekend, and all of them have been awesome so far. So this is going to be
2.5 hours on Friday night with Big Sal from ECW. 3 hours with Scott Hudson last night. I am hungover. But we have, this is the triple header. This is the third one in 3 days, and at this time, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to the 55 Live podcast, the one and only godfather of WA Wrestling, Davis Storm. Storm, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. Got to follow Big Sally and Scotty Hudson, though. That's quite the lineup we've had this weekend, gents.
Certainly is.
Not bad.
So, we kick things off usually the same each time, and talking about people's early life and how they discovered wrestling, how they became a wrestling fan. Would really love to know how you discovered wrestling.
WrestleMania 5, which at the time was on free-to-air television here on Channel 10. Sure. I think, I was around in the time when Channel 10 was launched. I think they were sold WrestleMania as something that would kind of help draw a younger audience to their network. So, Channel 10 hadn't been around that long at that stage. This would have been in 1989, I guess. I would have been about 10 years old at the time. So that was my first introduction. They obviously had a little bit of a cut down version, probably not the 3-hour full pay-per-view that would have gone live in America, but there was enough of it to really grab my attention. I'd never seen anything like this before. I wasn't a huge comic book fan. I'd watch a lot of cartoons as a kid, but there wasn't really anything like this. I remember distinctly that the Rockers were the first ones who really kind of reached through the screen and grabbed my attention, and watching them wrestle two big guys like Akeem and the Big Boss Man. Where do you see something like this? These two tiny guys wrestling these two huge behemoths, and you can't get that sort of action anywhere else. It was such an interesting thing, trying to make sense of it all. And I remember pretty early my brother telling me, walking in and seeing it and going, it's all fake. And he was about 5.5 years older than me. And I actually legitimately remember thinking to myself, I'm like, this idiot doesn't know what he's talking about. It's so obviously real. How can he possibly think this is fake? But just as the show went on, my early childhood influence was the Ultimate Warrior. So getting to see him later on the card, and then I was one of the few who, after seeing the story of Hogan and Savage, I was a Randy Savage supporter. I thought Hulk Hogan had done the dirty on him, that he did have lust in his eyes for Miss Elizabeth, and that he was, he left Savage out there to fight Bossman and Akeem all by himself. So yeah, I was very much in Randy Savage's corner, and I suppose also just being an Ultimate Warrior fan, that as the following year went on, and then eventually it led to the Warrior and Hogan match, that even more so I kind of distinctly drew this line in the sand with Hogan. Hogan was always on the outs with me as a kid, never a Hulkamaniac, always a little Warrior.
Awesome.
It's amazing. It's like it's so interesting to me to ask people about how they became a fan, because as a young kid, seeing something like that and with the imagination that a kid has, it's almost overwhelming. Seeing all these larger than life characters on the screen.
Yeah, I think, and you know, that's probably what Vince was going for at that stage. I imagine that wrestling had been a very dour, smoke-filled arenas kind of production, and Vince was the one that really grabbed it and jazzed it up and made it Hollywood and MTV, and really dragged it into the next decade, kicking and screaming. So, you know, without that influence, and maybe if the first wrestling I'd seen, despite the fact of how incredible they are, if the first wrestling I'd seen had maybe been you know, Dusty Rhodes and Nikita Koloff, who knows whether I would have been drawn to it in the same way. But these bright colors and these larger than life action figures come to life. That was something that just really drew my attention.
Right. And you know, I'd like to know more about, you know, as the years went by through the early 90s for you, you know, going to high school and all that. Was wrestling cool in school?
No, absolutely not. I was pretty fortunate, I suppose, that the guy who I fell in with in year 8, who was still a friend of mine and one of the explosive Coastal Wrestling originals, Phil Benjamin, who's one of my best mates. He came into high school loving wrestling as well, and I suppose the two of us, this was kind of our dirty little secret that nobody else could know, or else we'd probably get beaten up for being nerds. But we both loved wrestling. That said, you know, we kind of watched a fair bit maybe in year 8, and then sort of in year 9, 10, and 11, you know, you get distracted by other things, social things in high school, and just trying to get by and navigate your way in the world, that other things take your attention, girls most notably. And then, you know, as you get out of high school and get away from those influences, you maybe start to be drawn back to the things that you're actually interested in, instead of just being led by groupthink. And it was sort of in that time I left school a little bit early. I think I left at the beginning of year 12. I hadn't really particularly enjoyed year 11, and then I think I thought I would go back and just give it a little bit of a shot. And then within one term, I was pretty determined to get out of there and get into full-time work. So it was probably right around that time, though, that me and Phil both started to get back into watch WWE pay-per-views. And then we met a guy at a video store who would actually be our good friend in the future, Lukey Bolland. When we took out a bunch of wrestling videos, he said, "Oh, you guys wrestling fans?" Yes. And then we start to talk, and obviously, you know, when you don't meet that many wrestling fans, to bump into someone who's so knowledgeable and actually enjoys wrestling on the same level you do, you fall in with them pretty quick. So made pretty fast friends with Lukey, and then Lukey told us that he was ordering up-to-date WWE, with WWF at the time, pay-per-views from Overused. I think I cannot remember the name. I think it was called...
Was it Galaxy or? No,
it was Feg Collectibles, FEG. So those guys, I started with WWE, WWF pay-per-views. And that's when we really started to get right back into it. And this would have been in that 95, 96, 97 period where Austin was really catching fire. So, you know, that really drew our attention. And then this guy, cleverly, I don't know if he meant to do it or if he was just copying over other tapes, but what he would do is, if he was copying a 2.5-hour pay-per-view onto a 3-hour tape for you, he would fill the rest of it with other tapes that he had. So I would regularly end up with just these little slivers of Japanese wrestling on the end of there. And that was very much how my wrestling base expanded, that I started to see all these things that I'd never seen before. And through wrestling magazines, I had seen Jushin Thunder Liger, who'd been a massive, I suppose at the time I couldn't say inspiration because I hadn't even started wrestling yet, but he was definitely a figure that I was drawn towards, even just on the pages of Pro Wrestling Illustrated or Inside Wrestling. And I had the good fortune of seeing him live in Perth once in, I think it was about 93. Liger wrestled Chris Benoit. You might have heard of that guy.
No idea.
Shit.
They wrestled in Perth.
Wow.
I think the main event was maybe Jim Neidhart and Jake the Snake Roberts, I think.
Oh.
But I was up to date on recent WWF history at the time, and this is where Jake had been heel with the Cobra hanging off Savage's arm. So I was the only guy in the building booing Jake the Snake out of the place, and 100% behind Neidhart, who was very much the heel on that night. So. Yeah, I honestly don't know where we even jumped on at that question, because I tend to wander off into the woods with anything I'm asked. But yeah, look, it was probably around that 96, 97 period where I really started to get back into it. And then through my emerging love of Japanese wrestling, that was where it really started to turn, and it very much became something that I was absolutely obsessed with.
Right. I find when you're talking about seeing these guys in the magazines, I remember that stuff too. I find there's such a charm to being a fan back then and having no access to anything. So you've got to try and find a way to get a tape of something or other, whether it's ECW, whether it's, some of the Japanese stuff. It's very difficult to find. But I find a lot of charm in that. When you move on from being just a fan, when does it get to a point where you and your friends decide to start mucking around and do it yourselves?
That's an interesting question, but it's also a really tough one. I can't remember the exact moment where, we kind of said, let's make this more of a physical thing, something where we can get involved personally. I think, like anyone, it probably starts with you watch it as a fan, and then as you watch it more and you start to analyze little bits of the wrestling and little bits of the personalities, and you become more entrenched in the performance, I suppose, that you start to look beyond, why do I like this guy? Because, when I look back at the Ultimate Warrior, I very much think now, what were you thinking? But yeah, there must come a point where, I know that for, I think it was for my wife's 18th birthday, I had some friends who are very arty, who they painted my face as Sting. Like they started to get into wrestling just through my love of wrestling. And I remember them dressing me up as Sting to go to my wife's 18th birthday party. And these two guys, actually, just a little sidebar, two twin brothers from Perth, they actually they released their first Hollywood feature film last year. Was it last year or the year before? But yeah, they're doing very well for themselves overseas now. They're Josh and John Baker. If you want to give the brothers a look, their directional company is called Twin. But yeah, they were the guys who kind of, once you get into that, I got into that makeup and I carried the baseball bat for a night. And, you feel a little bit cooler than you actually are, and that maybe puts that seed in your head that you go, that's a really cool feeling, just to pretend to be someone else for an evening. And then, like any friends do, you start to go, I wonder how they do that. And then you drag a mattress out after you watch a pay-per-view and someone tries a razor's edge and you go, Jesus, that hurts like shit. And then you start to experiment with those one or two things. And then I think, like anybody in that early stage where you still don't quite have a full understanding of how involved wrestling is, you look at it and you go, oh shit, I could do that. I reckon I could do that. That just, I've got a little bit of athleticism. I think everybody who likes wrestling likes to think of themselves as being fairly charismatic. And you start to go, I think there must be a way that I can do this. But then when you when you look around online and, again, there for the emergence of the internet as well. And in those early days, there wasn't a lot around. Wrestling was one of the things that I think there probably was a fair bit on. I know wrestling, I've always heard that wrestling, pornography, and companies that are involved in developing war technology, they're very early adopters of technology. And I think part of that is just being on the WWE is probably the exception, that being on the fringe of entertainment and not quite being in the mainstream of entertainment, that you have that capacity to take a little more risk. But yeah, there were 2 wrestling schools that I knew of in Australia at that time, and they were both in Sydney. And I was born in Sydney, but I'd lived just about all of my life in Perth. So it was weighing up that option at the time. Do I leave my girlfriend and my friends and move to Sydney and try and get a start? And in your head, you kind of go, well, I go there and I train for a while, and then before I know it, I'm in the WWE. So you got to weigh it up in your head. Or can I sacrifice a certain amount of time over in Sydney, or is there going to be another way around trying to start this? And it was probably the death of a good friend of mine in 2000 that really got my ass into gear. Death is something that is so foreign to us as human beings until it affects somebody directly that you hear of people's aunties dying and people's uncles and grandmas and whatever else, but until it's someone that in the same circumstances that you're in, at the same age, that's lived the same sort of life that you have, and all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, there's no guarantees here. Granted that he took his own life. It was a choice that he made, but you suddenly realize that there's no guarantees there. I'm not necessarily going to see tomorrow. I'm not going to see next year. So this thing that I say that I love and that I want to do and that I want to be involved in, this industry that I want to be involved in, how do I get to moving in that direction? So I remember I went to uni for about not even a semester, maybe 3 months, because my initial thought was that if I get involved in video editing, I knew that video editing was obviously a huge part of WWE's presentation. And I thought if I can get into journalism or video editing or something like that, that could be my backdoor into this industry. And then somehow someone just came up with the idea of, hey, let's practice a few moves out on the front lawn. So you get a few things out, you start to throw each other around, and like you do, you go, man, I'm better at this than I think I am. And then all of a sudden, through putting up our own stuff online, this would have been in early 2001, we then get in touch with another crew, XBWA, which was Psycho Fet's group, Mikey Nichols, Drake Wallace, Richter, The Vagrant, Jimmy Payne. So there was a bunch of the guys that would go on to be the Explosive Coastal Wrestling crew, who we then met up with. And when you think about that now, we were me, Phil, Craig, Tyler Jacobs. We were 20, 21 or 22-year-old men at that stage.
Right.
Getting together with a bunch of 16 and 17-year-old kids to like hurl ourselves around the backyard. And, if you tell that story to anyone else, you think that's probably going to end in someone getting molested or beaten to death. Like that's not a good scene at all. But at the time it was obviously just so innocent. We loved wrestling, and we met another crew of people who loved wrestling enough that, and I think this is something that people sometimes neglect when they think of backyard wrestling. They just think it's people just trying to take a shortcut, that sometimes it's just people who love wrestling and want to do it immediately. And this is the outlet to get it out. That just, not everyone wants to go to the WWE, or not everyone has the capacity to go to the WWE, but whatever that avenue is that kind of fills that void and gets you started. that's where we were at. So we joined forces. A few of us went to the AWF. Greg Bounds was doing what he called Dream Camp back in the day. And to be honest, it was aimed more at kids. But we obviously needed some sort of avenue to learn the basics. So Greg's 5-day camp was kind of built around trying to show you enough of the basics that you could run a really simple match. And both matches I recorded were absolutely terrible. I came back from Sydney absolutely beaten to shit. Like, just your body's just ruined after 5 consecutive days of training. And got back, and it was Nate Dooley, the Vagrant, who eventually said, "Hey man, we gotta do something here. We can't just I feel like it always sounds silly when a backyarder says it, but he said, I feel like we've got some good wrestling minds here, and we can do something here. Let's just give it a crack. Even if it's just one show, and we do the one show and then nothing else ever happens, we'll always be able to hang our hats on the fact that we had a crack and did that one show." And that show ended up being Awakening in November of 2001.
Jeez, that's such a an interesting, long winding story about how it went from this thing where you're just mucking around, then the next thing is getting really serious. And I really appreciate what you have to say about backyard wrestling. I don't want to go on a backyard wrestling tirade or anything, but young guys who have other things going on in their lives, they have this thing inside them. They want to do it. They just want to do it. They want to get it out of their system. So that's why they do it. I don't think there's ever any bad intentions when people do backyard wrestling. Although I did a little bit more than most people would have. But it's interesting that how it morphed into becoming a professional fed. And so you've done your camp. You come back. Are you starting to teach the other guys yourself?
Sure, but let's be real. 5 days, 5 days wrestling training, and I'm now passing on my wealth of knowledge to all these young guys at home. I mean, look, we were taking it seriously. As silly as it sounds now in hindsight, we were taking it seriously. We were getting mats together, and we were hiring gym space at the Wanneroo Community Centre, and we would go down there and put the mats down, and we would start to practice. And we took it as seriously as we possibly could. We were very big on, as much as it hurts, you had to be able to do a move 3 or 4 times and be able to actually execute it safely before we would allow anyone to do it on a show. Because I always mess this quote up, but I remember hearing Liger say years ago, for every minute he spends in the ring, he wants to spend an hour training to be ready for that moment. So, and in reality, the hours that Liger's now logged up in the wrestling ring, I doubt that he could have spent an hour for every minute that he spent in the ring. But that mentality was very much there, that we wanted to be able to put on a half decent performance if we were going to go out there. And so we took it as seriously as we could, and I took that 5 days knowledge, and we spread that as far as we could in terms of just learning how to bump, I suppose. And then after that, and I think most decent pro wrestling trainers will be able to tell you this, that for me, the stuff that I can improve for guys is timing, it's movement, it's psychology. But moves, often guys will come to me with moves and say, "Hey man, how do I do this move?" I'll say, "I don't know, just get in the ring. Get in the ring and let's work it out." A lot of it is just balance and timing and practice, and just getting the reps in until you feel comfortable with doing stuff. And that's kind of how it was for us, that you had to fumble around with it and screw it up 3 or 4 times before often having that many minds in one room. And, you look back in hindsight and you go, if you have Jimmy Payne, Davis Storm, Nate Dooley, Mikey Nichols in a room together, you'd hope that between one of you can work it out. But we were all just young dumb kids at that time. But there was enough wrestling nous in the room that you could kind of work it out. And there's this one transition between Jerry Lynn and Lance Storm where one of them's in a top wrist lock, and he scoots over the top into a hammerlock, I think. And I'm 19 years in now, and I still cannot work out how they did it. All the complex moves and stuff that you're able to look at and break it down to these simple movements and go, there's the secret. And Jerry Lynn and Lance Storm have got this one top wrist lock that I just cannot get my head around after 19 years.
You know what? Sorry, Jack. You go.
Watching both those guys, Jerry Lynn and Lance Storm, it's like watching magicians chain wrestle. And
Yeah, it is.
I mean, you could just watch them, and even like going back to late 90s ECW when it was Jerry Lynn and RVD doing their matches and their program, like the sort of sequences they were doing. It's like, how the hell do you get to that point where you're that damn good? But I want to wind back the clock and go to that Awakening show in 2001. Sort of tell me about the process of sort of getting the ring together, all the equipment for it, booking the show. Like, how was all that experience for you guys?
It was multifaceted. So we almost had departments, although nobody kind of looked at it that way. We pretty much had departments that I was focused more so on the wrestling and the booking of the show, with obviously other hands involved. But then the actual process of getting the show together, a lot of that was Nate Dooley, Jimmy Payne, Mikey Nichols, Psycho Fett. I'd say the four of them were probably the primary guys in terms of getting a building. Cool, we've got a building. What do we do next? We need a ring. The story with the ring is just hilarious. But we managed to organize a kickboxing ring. And the guy that hired us the ring would actually become someone who was really valuable to us over the years. He was a Muay Thai instructor, and he would run his own shows. His name is Kevin Jr. Kevin would eventually join the Combat Sports Commission when that came in Perth. So I still see him occasionally when I would go to fight shows. I would see Kevin around the traps. But sorry, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but we organized this ring from Kevin. Now, keep in mind that the kickboxing fights that Kevin promotes sometimes have world title fights inside them. So, the ring has to be a specific size. He needs a certain number of ropes. The pads need to be a certain way. So the ring needs to be in immaculate condition in order for him to be able to host world title fights. Because, you can't have a guy slip over on a banana peel in a world championship fight. So we hire this ring, and the guys have given him a heads up about the stuff we're going to do. But, when you tell a Muay Thai promoter who has no idea what pro wrestling is that you're going to bring some chairs and tables into the ring, he probably assumes that you're going to have a sit-down meeting or a contract signing, and that everyone's going to go their separate ways at the end of it, and then you're going to take the chairs and the table out. He doesn't think you are going to use those chairs and tables as weapons, and potentially one of those legs of those tables is allegedly going to rip a hole in his canvas. Okay, allegedly.
Oh no.
Allegedly. So, so the end of the show's going on, and me and Jimmy are in the ring for the main event. And unbeknownst to me, Kevin's in the corner of the room watching the end of this show take place. And full credit to him, there's a table propped up in the corner against the ropes. And in his head, he must be thinking, what are these idiots doing? They're going to ruin my ring. To his credit, he sits back and doesn't say a word, because he very easily could have run straight into the ring and said, stop that immediately. And we would have said, yes, sir. Not just because it's his ring, but because this man could kill me in the blink of an eye. So we finish our match. We go backstage. Everyone's patting each other on the back. And then the guys quietly say to me, hey, mate, Kevin wants to see you about the state of the ring. Now, God. I have not dealt with Kevin at any stage of this process. It has been Nate and Jimmy who have handled this process the whole way. But all of a sudden, Kevin's looking to beat somebody up, and I'm the guy in charge of the ring.
Oh, shit.
So he comes up to me, and Kevin, I believe Kevin's Burmese. He comes up to me, and he's a tiny bit shorter than me, but he is incredibly intimidating. And he walks very, very close to my face, and he's got two of his friends with him who are helping to pack down the ring, who are traditional Australians who you imagine then get into Muay Thai and are very influenced by the culture, and they've got the shaved head and the braided rat's tail down the back. So I'm suddenly surrounded by three Muay Thai fighters who are questioning me as to why we just did all that shit in the ring and what we're going to do to fix it. And I, to his credit, I apologize profusely. I say, mate, I'm sorry I didn't have anything to do. I believed that we had cleared all this with you. And he basically said, well, how the fuck was I to know that that's what was going to happen? And fair enough. If you never watched a wrestling show, you couldn't have even imagined that. So, we eventually were able to pay him back for all the damages to the ring. And he actually came to us maybe about 2 months later. Well, it couldn't have even been 2 months because the next show I think was mid-January or early February. But he came to us not long after and said, hey, one of my students is selling a ring that I built. I might be able to put you in touch with him so that you can purchase that. And this was a tiny kickboxing ring. I think it was about 15 foot. It was just a training ring. And we had to have a sit-down meeting with a bunch of our guys and say, hey, I think the ring was about $1,500. Can we raise this capital and just throw it together in order to get this ring? Yes, we can. I believe Mikey Nichols may have liberated some mats from Doubleview High School that we then used to pad out the ring. So Kevin ended up being this amazing resource for us when, if he'd been nine out of 10 boxing or kickboxing promoters in Perth, he probably would have just dropped me where I was standing, taken his ring, and I never would have heard from him again. But full credit to him, just a champion bloke, helped us get into this ring. And then afterwards also had us on some of his shows as well, just to do 5-minute promotional bouts, just to give people an idea of what we're about and try and promote ourselves. So,
wow.
Yeah, but the again, back from the sidebar, it was all these different layers of Nate and Jimmy were the ones who were left holding a lot of the ball in terms of organising venue and ring. And then the Doubleview guys, Mikey, Psychofet, Drake Wallace, they were all involved in multimedia at school. So they asked their teachers about borrowing some camcorders. And I think one of them might have played the guitar. So we just managed to get an amp and then hook a mic up to it so that we could do, Lukey did live commentary on the day. But it is such a team effort that, there's 16 guys on the show, and then Slick Rick Sanders was someone who was very instrumental behind the scenes. But you all pitch in and just do your little bit, whatever it is, whether it's how do we create a program just so we've got something to give people a bit of background on who we are and what they can expect to see. And then getting word out. There was a WZWA show, which was the thing. I can't even remember the guy's name that was doing it. But
Andrew McManus? There
you go. It was Andrew McManus, yes. Fortunately for us, those guys were touring, I think maybe 3 or 4 months before we did the show it was November of 2001. So we were able to hand out some flyers that night and try and get some promotion. And on the day, I think we probably had about 150 people in a community centre. And being young, dumb kids,
wow.
we went, hey, you know what the best way to introduce everyone is a 16-man tournament, because that won't take up 4.5 hours of everyone's life that they'll never get back.
Oh, God.
So we do a 16-man single elimination tournament. And, by the end of the show, I think, probably a third of the audience has already trailed off and gone home for dinner. But if you go back and watch that tape, I have no doubt that it'll be absolutely disgraceful to watch. But, there are people who were at that event who still come to our shows now these are people like us who loved wrestling. They just wanted to be a part of it. They just wanted to feel that energy of a live performance. And I think that, they gave us a lot of leeway because they could feel us trying, and they just wanted something here that they could latch onto as well, that we could all be a part of. So we were incredibly fortunate that everything came off the way it did. Nobody died. Some very, very sore bodies for a long period of time. And then inevitably the question comes up after you do the first one, where do we go from here?
It's an absolute crazy evolution watching how the company has sort of expanded over the last 20 years. And speaking of a crazy evolution, especially the venues you guys have used, going from Cyril Jackson to Claremont now. Take us back to sort of the first home you guys would a venue you guys would properly call home for the first time, being the Wanneroo Showgrounds. What are your favorite memories from that venue?
Oh God, they're probably that venue is probably most of my favorite memories of those early days. That just also used the Wanneroo Community Centre, which is where we held Awakening, which was just across the road from there as well.
Yep.
So we did use that for a period of time, and then it felt like we were consistently getting sort of right on the boundary of what would be considered the capacity of the venue. So I think at first we were sort of getting 200 and then 250 and then 300. And then we were starting to breach 300, 350 fairly regularly. So then we try to look for a slightly bigger premises, and the Wanneroo Showgrounds was just perfect for those early days. That it was gritty and grimy and dirty, and it was in reality, it's a shed. It's a shed in the middle of an oval that it allowed this segregation of the fans and the audience, but from backstage, you could still feel the energy coming off the crowd. Nowadays at Gate 1, which is such a beautiful venue for wrestling, but you lose that energy from backstage trying to watch the match. Just the curtains are kind of made to deaden sound because it's a music venue. So you don't quite get that same feeling. But just at the beginning of a show, you would just hear that crowd go up, and that energy would just pump you up so much for whenever you had to go out there. God, that venue being full, I mean, beyond full. I mean, illegally full, like squeeze them in with a shoehorn, get them in there however you can. 500 people on that night in 2003, it would have been. I remember so clear. I have so many clear memories of this thing that happened 17 years ago. If my wife asks me a question, I walk into the next room to go get something for her. I've got to walk back out there and ask her what she said again because I've already forgotten. But I've got these memories just burnt into my head. Doing the Iron Man match with Jag there, doing the 6-man street fight, which just even today, so many of those things are so clear to me. I remember getting into the ring and looking out because the place just continued to swell throughout the night. So I think, when we opened doors, we might have been at 420 or whatever. And then by the time we get to the main event, there's 500 people in there. And I have no idea how we got them in there. But there were legitimately 500 people in there. And, we knew that this brawl was going to go all over the building. So you're kind of trying to work out, well, where the hell are we even going to get out into the fans? Walking out with Jimmy and Nate, and then getting in the ring. And I remember it must have been Wally, Drake Wallace, the two of us squaring off in the middle of the ring, and we're both jawing at each other. And he just looks around and he goes, "This is fucking chaos, man." And you just looked around, a 2-year build to the end of this storyline, and just, for a bunch of kids, whacking this story together of this evil group of teenagers who've taken over a wrestling company, but to be able to get people invested enough that they cared that much. They came there that night to see those guys lose, love them or hate them, and plenty of people loved them. Everyone came there that night to see them lose. And I remember brawling out into the crowd with Mikey, and you couldn't find a safe space to move into where there weren't people. It was just unbelievable, just really, really pure emotion. And definitely, after that, we struggled a little bit, maybe for the next 12 to 18 months. And I wouldn't say that we struggled in-ring. In-ring continued to climb. But just trying to find something, I think that storyline of the Uprising hooked people that came to those early shows. But then we got them to the payoff. And I think a lot of people kind of thought, well, I I don't necessarily love wrestling, but I wanted to see this ride out. I got hooked on this ride, and I want to ride it until it's done. And then when it was done, your regulars still came, your hardcore still came, but those extra people that we were drawing along, and particularly in those early days, I think you have a lot of friends and family who come and support, and they come once and then they go, oh, cool, that storyline's pretty cool. I want to come back and see how that all finishes up. So there was a little bit of a 2004, I think creatively was a little bit of a dead spot, that just, we didn't have that same energy that kind of carried us through those early days, where people are just, they're so invested in seeing you as a company do well too, because, in some way or another, they're either there as wrestling fans or they're there as your friends in those early days. So they're so invested in seeing the company do well that they want to be there and see us achieve these small little milestones. But yeah, the Showgrounds is just, it was the perfect venue for the perfect time. And I feel like we were probably ready for the move up to the Venville Rec Centre when we did move. But if we had gone there earlier, I don't think we would have been. That those 2 or 3 years in the Showgrounds really helped us grow and develop to a point where we would be ready for a bigger, nicer venue.
Awesome, I have to chime in here and just say I was at several of those shows in that venue, and I have to say the atmosphere, I can't compare it to anything else that I've ever experienced when I've been to a wrestling show. That was the best atmosphere that I'd ever been a part of as a fan.
Yep, amazing.
I never got to experience it. I was way too young. But I have.
How old were you? Legitimately,
in 2003. I would have been 6 years old that year.
Oh my god.
I remember, around 2004, 2005, my dad wanted to take me to a local wrestling show. I could not remember for the life of me if it would have been you guys or if it was a touring gig. But I don't know, I just never went to anything when I was younger because I was scared of fireworks. Like I never got to go to WWE as a kid because I was scared of Kane's entrance, things like that. I would have been, old enough to experience those shows. And I'm sort of kicking myself that I never just, as a kid, just pushed to go see wrestling live because I was a massive fan at that age, like huge fan at that age. So I wanted to sort of talk to you about the name Explosive Coastal Wrestling and then the transition to EPW and Explosive Pro Wrestling, what it is now. So how did you come up with the EPW name?
So Explosive Coastal Wrestling, I think, was pretty self-explanatory. What happened was, in the early days, ECW was hot. We were able to get our hands on a replica ECW World Championship belt. So quite obviously, you call yourself ECW. Fancy that. We managed to make ourselves ECW because we had a title that said ECW on it. Very clever. And then at some point, and I doubt it would have been me because to say that I lacked self-awareness at age 23 would be a complete understatement. Someone eventually one day has the hard conversation and says, hey, mate, we're 2 years in and we're ECW. Come on. And, the company had built to a point where Rick Sanders had said, hey, man, I can chip in the money for some, and he did a lot of our early design work, but he said, I can chip in the money for some replica UFC titles. They won't look like anything else anyone else has. And I believe that I can print a sticker that will be able to cover the UFC part of the logo without looking too obvious from a distance. You obviously don't want to take that belt out and celebrate with the fans afterwards because they go, hey, man, that's a UFC replica title with a EPW sticker across the middle of it. But he said, yeah, look, I think I can make this thing look a little bit better. And as we moved away from the Explosive Coastal Wrestling name, there were a bunch of names that were thrown up. And I remember there was talk of even going to 4 initials, perhaps. We knew we wanted to keep something in there that would still have that have the history in there. So I think I can't be sure, but I think I might have even fought to have held on to the coastal name because I thought that represented Perth and Western Australia quite well. But but yeah, exactly who brought the conversation up. I've got a feeling it would have been Nate or Jimmy, because they were generally the ones that led these kinds of tough conversations. But yeah, just eventually somehow settled on explosive pro wrestling. That I think it was important to try and, like I said, keep some sense of that history. So the word explosive stayed. We still wanted it to be something that was easy to chant. So being able to EPW, ECW, exact same thing, essentially. And I think we were at a stage where it was important for us to have the word professional tied in there, that we'd felt like we'd made enough strides at that point. We had, excuse me, we'd definitely worked ourselves off the Australian wrestling shit list. That for a long period of time, we were described as the red-headed stepchild of Australian wrestling. And, you know, our trainer, when we went to Adelaide to be trained by Jag and Cole in 2002, Cole's whole thing, I mean, despite the work ethic that he drilled into us, the main thing we took away from him was he recognized, even at that early stage, this is 2002, he recognized how evil the internet could be. And he said, you stay off the internet, you shut your mouth, you keep your opinion to yourself, and you put your head down and work. And he said, the respect that you want will come in time when people see your work, because they won't be able to deny the work that you've put in. And that is very much how I've tried to lead my whole time in wrestling. I try not to speak out on things unless I suppose I've gotten more opinionated as I've gotten older. And part of that is I feel like I've done my work, and I have what I've done, my legacy, if you want to call it that, set off to the side. But just also part of it is just age and not really giving a crap what anybody else thinks. Just being able to be comfortable with who you are and say, you know, those who are on board with me are going to jump on board, and those who aren't don't have to. But yeah, you know, professional, that said it all about where we wanted to be at that stage. We wanted people to look at us and take us as more than just a backyard wrestling group come to life.
Awesome, man.
That's interesting as hell, man.
That's really good. It's crazy, because I never would have ever guessed in a million years you guys would have been ever viewed as that in Australia, especially considering how far you guys have come now, being one of the premier brands in Australia.
Yeah, it's a crazy journey that, you know, you look back now and consider. There were people just after Mikey got hurt at the second show, and we made page 3 of the West Australian. I've still got the clipping aside somewhere. There's a sweet picture of Jimmy T-boning me out of my boots. And the headline said, "Wrestler dices with death." Mikey hit his head pretty severely on the second show, started going into convulsions. I had to carry him backstage. We had to call an ambulance. And just as our luck would have it, a criminal reporter from the West Australian happened to be in the audience that night, just by chance. And we made page 3 of the West Australian newspaper. You know, I have been trying for the past 18 years to get back to page 3 of the West Australian and can't get a sniff. Cannot get a sniff. So yeah, you know, having that, and we had wrestlers who were calling us out online and said, you know, you're a disgrace to the industry, you've got no respect. And that was hard. That was hard for us, because we always thought of ourselves as people who loved wrestling and respected wrestling. To hear the entire industry just turn on us like that was really tough. And to have Jag could have just become another guy with a fork and a pitch and a torch and come after us. He could have stuck the knife in and just said, you know, you guys are bums. But he reached out when he didn't have to, and he could see through the work that we'd put online that we were crap, but we obviously cared, and we wanted to move wrestling in the direction that he wanted to move wrestling in, that we were taking chances and we were taking risks and we were doing moves that the traditional guys didn't like. And at that stage, Adelaide and Melbourne were still, and Sydney were still very old school. The wrestling style they presented was very carny, very 1990s WWE. And what we were doing was something different. And Jag saw something in that and related to that he jumped on board with us. And just having his name attached to us, even before we really went back and proved ourselves back over here, just having his name attached to us did so much in terms of trying to help us earn that credibility back.
Yeah, shit, man. It's some trying times there for you guys, and obviously you came out the other end pretty good. And you've actually already answered a question that I had lined up about what people from other states thought of you guys at the time. I want to know what your thoughts are on what the Australian wrestling scene was like during those days. I remember on Fox Sports there being a few Australian wrestling super shows, which never happened again. Did any of you guys ever get to be on one of those shows as well? And yeah, just what are your thoughts on what the scene was like at that time?
It was very much emerging. So there was the old school and there was the new school pushing through, and it was being led by different people in different states. So, Ryan Eagles and Madison Eagles were kind of responsible for pushing the newer style of wrestling through in Sydney. Lobo was responsible for pushing a new group of guys through in Melbourne that he didn't want to stay stuck in the old school style of wrestling. Henry was super responsible for really inspiring a lot of people in Australian wrestling. Jag and Havoc were doing it in Adelaide, along with guys like Steve O'Neill and Rocky Monero. And then, we were kind of the sole guys out here flying the flag out here. So, it was definitely in a transition phase, and it's fair to say that there wasn't a lot of cooperation between borders, that not in the way that there is now, that we looked to everyone else, and not necessarily in a negative way that we wanted them to fail, but we would see something that someone would do and that would fire us up to say, hey man, look at what they're doing. We need to do better here. It pushed us harder to get back in the gym and do more work, or if it was promotional stuff, putting out better quality videos or better quality flyers or whatever it was. It was just, there was a real competition between the states about, who was going to be the one to fly the flag for the new generation of Aussie wrestling. But in terms of what did that scene look like? We all begrudgingly respected each other. So, I looked at Melbourne and yes, we wanted to be better than them. And I looked at Sydney and yes, I wanted to be better than them. But you could look over there and you go, oh, they're just like us. They're pushing like we are. They're trying to push the boundaries. They're trying to develop a new style of wrestling. They're not staying stuck in the mud. They're not comfortable going out there carrying a 2x4, giving it a hoe and a thumbs up to the crowd. These are guys who are pushing the envelope and trying to, having bloody ladder matches and death matches and all kinds of stuff that, not my cup of tea, but they weren't comfortable just showing up and collecting a paycheck just for making an appearance. These were guys that the artistic side of wrestling meant something to them. And they were, if we had to pay with our bodies, then that was just what you had to do. But, I regularly hear from guys who are kind of top Aussie wrestlers now that say, hey man, we used to watch your video clips back in the day, and that we were actually their first exposure to Australian wrestling. Robbie Eagles is always the most famous one that I will point to. Although I think J-Rock Bronson Reed, I think he saw a lot of our stuff online as well. But Robbie regularly reminds me, I have no shame in saying I message Robbie regularly to say, hey man, what's up? So happy for your success, because he's worked so hard over such a long period of time. And I genuinely don't think anybody dislikes him. Robbie's just the sweetest guy in the world, and he's worked so hard. And I'll message him and say, could not be happier for him. And he'll say, hey man, you guys helped G me up. Like if you look at all the backyard, which is incredible, because if you consider, the stuff we were doing in ring at the time, Robbie was probably doing crazier shit in backyard times. HVWA, him and Matty Diamond, they were probably doing stuff like far exceeding anything we were doing in the ring at the time. But that he looked to that was his first exposure to Australian wrestling, and he kind of went, oh cool, like wrestling doesn't have to be the old 90s style of wrestling. We can move things forward, and we do more exciting things. So yeah, it was cool being in those times. Like you felt like you're in a war, and it pushed everyone so hard to, we want to be the guys that when people think of Aussie wrestling, they say, oh yeah, that's EPW. That's the crew we know of. You didn't want to be second place or third place. You wanted to be the top dog.
Yeah. I'm really interested to know what things were like, I guess, behind the scenes with you guys during that time. You're all young.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a big party all the time after every event? Did you guys, really get on the sauce?
It was a community that show day. Everyone, so many people are involved from the time we pick up the truck to you drive to Maddington, you load the ring into the truck, you load the production equipment in the truck. Maybe you have to stop at Matrix Productions or somewhere like there on the way and pick up some gear from them. And then you drive to Wanneroo, and then you spend all day setting up the ring, setting up the lights, setting up the entranceway. In the old days, back in the Wanneroo showgrounds, we would have to hang black plastic pretty much from one side of the building to the other to be able to black out a backstage area for us.
Oh God!
So right, yeah. Someone had to get up there and put that up as well. And then, after the show, you pack it down, you load the truck back up, you drive back to Maddington, you unload it all. And if you're unlucky enough, like I was on many occasions, you set the ring back up as well. And, by that stage, I'm trashed. I'm not going anywhere. So there was a small group of us. There was a small group that would leave after we'd finished packing down at the show, and they might go and get on the sauce. But, there was a bunch of us poor buggers who had to go back, and you wouldn't be leaving the factory until sort of 4 or 5 the following morning.
Shit.
But on the flip side, every weekend that we didn't have a show, we were all together. There was almost every Friday night, every Saturday night, everyone was just together all the time, because you were a part of this tiny community that you shared this one thing with that you couldn't share with anybody else. That, I could go to work and I could have conversations about music, and I could have conversations about my love life, and I could have conversations about the footy, but I couldn't talk to them about this one thing that meant more to me than anything else. And the only place I could get that was from my crew. This tiny little crew of, 20 or 30 people. It wasn't a big group at the time. And just when you have 20 or 30 people in a group, it's going to be someone's birthday almost every weekend. So you're getting together and you're having a party, and then, people are drinking, and then you're going home, and then the following morning, 10 o'clock, we're all at training. Just that was the mentality back then. That just I was lucky. I wasn't a huge drinker, so it never really affected me all that much. But credit to those young boys. They would go out and hit it, and then they would be there ready to go first thing in the morning. And when their number was called, they went. So, but yeah, wow, it's just a really tight knit community, is the way I would describe it.
It's like a family, man. Like it must really be special to you and everyone else that was involved during then. Just some great memories that you shared together all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And you try to encourage the new kids to do that as well. That I have good one-on-one relationships with all these guys, but I'm not going to go out on the town and party with a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds. Like, I'm almost 41 now. Like I'll leave that partying to them. But I encourage them to keep that circle tight and to look out for each other. And I also try to say to the whole group, you're not going to love everyone in the group. That's just not how it goes. You get a group of 20 people together, and especially now with the periphery people involved in EPW, you can have up to 40 or 50 people there on any given night. But you're not going to love everyone. But this is your team. Like you go to war with this team. And you don't have to like everyone, but you at least have to get along. And in this environment, you got to have each other's back.
Before I throw it back to Jack, I wanted to say, I remember the first shows that I would go to as a fan, and how innovative everything was to me, and how solid the stories were. It just made it feel like you couldn't miss the next show. What was the process like back then creatively, and how has that changed over the years?
There was a lot of arguing.
Oh, God.
For most of those early days, it was myself and Rick Sanders who would make the final decision on everything. But then there were a lot of people on the outskirts that would chip in and have their opinions. So Nate Dooley was one. Jimmy Payne was one. Jimmy would be more, if he saw something that he thought didn't make sense, he would speak up. Whereas Nate would actually have an idea. Mikey would actually have an idea. And then over time, you start to work with different people in different minds. And as you find people who have a strength in a particular area, you lean on them more. So as Devlin Reeves got onto the card, and he was, at the time, he always laughs because he says when he started, he imagined he was going to be this big, tough ass kicker. And then show number one, we have him come out to CNC Music Factory, Everybody Dance Now, and he's the Playboy Devlin Reeves, and he's kind of this fun, goofy
favorite
character.
It's my favorite. It is my favorite.
But when you see someone who has great command of character and comedy, you go, cool, we can leave that guy in that pocket and he can suggest ideas to us coming out of that area. And then, but it was really myself and Rick that took the majority of the decision making. And it makes things really easy when you have a small team and you have two people making the decisions, because you will have people that aren't happy. But once you know the decision making is just down to those two people, you don't feel the need. You like people to be involved in the creative process, but really at some point somebody has to just say yay or nay. When you have a locker room full of guys like today, so it's much harder because you have a lot of experienced voices in the room, and everybody does wrestling differently. Me and Bobby Marshall were having a laugh the other night about how often we disagree on wrestling. And no two people have clashed on booking more than me and Bob. And, for the longest time, it was just me going, well, I'm in charge. So you can shut your mouth and eat it. Nowadays, I am booking, but Bob is my boss. Within EPW, Bob is my boss. So it makes the dynamic a lot more interesting, because now I do have to consider other people's voices, and it's weighing up. Can I work artistically within the system and within the parameters I've been given, or do I have to say this ain't for me? You need to get someone else in this role, because again, I'm fortunate enough that I'm at a position where I don't need to book. I don't even really want to book. But just, I feel like it's a role that I can serve well at the moment. So I'm happy to be there doing it. But if someone decides that I'm not doing what they want me to do, I'm also very happy not to do it. So understanding what my strengths are and the way that I book and the way I like to book, if that isn't congruent with what management wants out of me, then cool. Like, you need to know within yourself, I will continue to toe the line up to here, up to here, up to here. Yeah, no, that's too far. That's too far. And then you say, hey, either we come back to a place that I'm more comfortable in, I need to change, or I need to change my environment. So, yeah, it's both have their challenges. But I think when I was younger and dumber and more aggressive and more angry, I was happier to just be the bad guy, to just say, hey man, I as I like to always say, I respect your opinion, but your opinion is wrong. Whereas nowadays it is tougher, because as someone who goes out there and if I disagree with something in the booking, I will go and fight tooth and nail, particularly when I wasn't booking. If I'm not happy with something, I will fight you to the death. But then if you put your foot down and say, no, man, that's it, I will go out there and give that 110%. Because if it fails, I want it to fail on your bullshit, not on mine.
Yeah.
That whatever you give me, I will go out there and kill myself trying to make that happen. But if it doesn't work, the blame will be squarely on your shoulders, not on mine. But then, I have guys do the same to me, where they put their foot down and say, man, I really want it like this and not like this. And you say, cool, man, go ahead and do it, because you don't want to take that control out of, someone on our roster. Like, I'm not gonna micromanage a Marcus Pitt. I'm not going to micromanage a Damien Slater. I'm not going to micromanage a Bobby Marshall. They know what to do. They know who they are. It's not for me to tell them who they are. If they get it wrong, it's for me to go to them afterwards and say, hey, man, didn't agree with that. You didn't do that. I didn't agree with how you did that. But you don't want to crowd an artiste too much, because then you take the fun out of it for them. And then you end up with WWE clones who are unhappy doing their job for millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Sort of going into your career, we're going about 10 years in, you had your first retirement. I believe this was 2011?
Yes. Yep.
Was this a break, or were you done for good, or was there an injury involved in that? Or
I just told this story recently. I cannot for the life of me remember where I told it. But so this retirement was always a kayfabe retirement. That my plan was to kill off Davis Storm.
Yep.
My plan was to come back as a kabuki style Great Muta-esque character that had really shocking movements, and the face paint and the mist and all that get up. I thought, I'll walk away. I walked away for legitimate reasons, that I had, I felt like head injuries were starting to pile up. I was spitting when I talked. I was slurring my words. I was losing train of thought constantly in the middle of sentences. And this was right around the birth of my son. I just thought, I don't want my son to be spoon feeding me at age 41. Well, here I am. So, and he's not spoon feeding me yet. But I didn't want to be left in that position. I wanted to enjoy the kid's childhood. So I made the decision just to take some time off. And then I thought, I can kill off this Davis Storm thing and be done with that. And then when I come back, I can come back as this interesting new character. In the 12 and a bit months that I'm off, Chase Griffin decides to debut as a kabuki style babyface.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which is I mean, he didn't know, but the face paint, the movement, the attitude, the theme music, basically everything he did was how I had imagined I would come back. So I sat out and tried to think of something else creative, and I'm not a super artsy creative guy in that sense. My one idea was gone, and I was like, you know what? I'll just come back as Davis Storm, I guess.
I don't mean to rub salt in the wounds either, but I went to every EPW show in 2012, and I absolutely loved Chase Griffin's gimmick. How was it sort of being at shows and not wrestling? Like, did you miss it?
No. I think, and probably having my son was really the turning point, that I had always looked at the rest of the roster and tried to always want the best for them. I've never been someone who I think any of the guys in the roster could look at and say, you're trying to take that away from me so you can have it for yourself. That over my time as a trainer, my thought always was, when I saw Bobby Marshall and Shane Haste and Mikey Nichols and these guys screaming up behind me, that I think there's definitely a part of you that says, oh shit, man, they're working harder than I am. Do I teach them everything I know, or do I keep a few tricks in the back pocket so that I'll always be useful? And at some point you have to say, if they're working harder than me and they can take that information and make it better than I can, they deserve that more than I do. And it is just on me to try and lift my work rate to be better. And I was at a point where it was satisfying being on the outside and just helping people at training, and then watching them translate that into the ring and start to grow and start to believe in themselves. That I think that was probably the first time in my time in wrestling that when I saw someone achieve something awesome, I didn't go, oh man, that's great, but then also feel that feeling of emptiness that shit, man, I could have done that. Or
Yeah.
what would I do in that position? Instead, I was now in a spot where I could look at the rest of the roster and just say, hey, man, that's awesome. And sharing the joy of whatever they're getting over. That it really was just kind of sitting back and just waiting for something to come up. And I can't even remember if I think I was booking at the time. I think I was still booking at the time because there was quite a period of time where I gave it away, probably a stretch for about 6 or 7 years. And I think it was not long after that I gave it away. But we needed someone for a spot for a 10-man tag with William Darcy that I suppose on some front we were trying to recreate the uprising angle, but just in a different
Right.
frame, in a different format. And yeah, we needed one more babyface. So I ended up giving myself the call.
I remember that. I remember that night very well, especially with the pyro coming out of the corners and everyone was playing. So it's just an awesome
Yeah.
moment. I remember,
Yep.
man.
Awesome.
Carl?
The next little section I want to go over is the solution.
Yep.
It's my favorite storyline in EPW history. First and foremost, I want to know how that was all put together from idea to fruition.
So the idea and the aesthetic and all of that, I can credit 100% to Shippy. That he was already around the fringes doing the Warship Anonymous gimmick.
Yeah.
He had spent time between him and Jado Banger. They had spent time creating this aesthetic around this character. And it was cool. It was something that really separated Shippy from the rest of the pack. And the guys were presenting his he would put his videos up and they would have these little spots for him on shows, but I think they didn't really have an idea of where it was going. And I remember, I'm sure it was Jamie Jura came to me and said, hey, can I have Shippy as a guy in this thing that I want to do? And I don't know what it was that went off in my own head. And I can't remember if I actually agreed to it with Jamie and then went back on it, or whether I cut it off at the pass and said, nah, man, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. But I looked at this as this chance to somehow get to this character that I had imagined myself being when I came back, that I would be able to paint my face. I would be able to move to a different style and a different attitude and remove myself from the Davis Storm that everyone had known for 11 or 12 years, that this could be something that could really help reset me. And I felt like we were a nice combination of Shippy had the aesthetic down, he had the gimmick down, he had the whole feeling around it was fantastic. And I brought a level of in-ring credibility that would help him as well. So I thought this is a nice combination of his gimmick will help pull me up, and my in-ring and my credibility with the fans will help bring him up at the same time. And that beginning, I was just thinking about that, the beginning, the way we laid the tracks. That is as good a pro wrestling angle that I've been involved in. I think that, he would show up every time Hayden was involved in something, and I would look like I was trying to save Hayden, but every time that I tried to save Hayden, I'd end up costing Hayden. So Hayden's looking at Shippy saying, this guy's out to get me. And then eventually, obviously, the wheel turns in Hayden's head, and we're going to announce this new member of the Solution. And we go to the ring, and Hayden's accusing me of, you're going to be the guy, because he knows that I've been screwing him at every turn, and I'm denying it. And then Shippy comes out with Richter, and the fans go, "Oh, that's the new guy." and then that moment where I think I stalked down Shippy and Richter, and I grab him by the shirt, and then I slowly turn around, and the three of us are standing on one side of the ring, and Hayden's on the other. And just the penny dropping moment with the fans and with I love that, man. I'm not a Vince Russo swerved guy. I am a guy who I like laying the tracks that if you are paying attention, you go, I know exactly where this is going. And yes, sometimes that's predictable, but I like to reward the fans who are paying attention. That if you lay enough breadcrumbs that they go, man, I knew it. It's so rewarding just to hear that audience go, oh God, of course.
Yeah.
And just that build from there, particularly to the 6-man tag with Hughesy, Banksy, and Hayden. That was one of the funnest periods of my whole career. That just working with those guys and having this great angle that ran through the middle of the card and sort of helped strengthen up the middle of the show was just so rewarding. That match actually won Match of the Year, voted by the wrestlers. So we have a fan vote, and then at the end of the year we have a wrestler vote, and the wrestlers voted that Match of the Year. And I think that one probably means more to me than anything, because we were a mid-card feud. We weren't designed to be and I think, if you look at the in-ring work that year, Chris Weiss, Alex Kingston, and Marcus Pitt are just absolutely annihilating it at the top of the card. But we had such a strong emotional connection with that storyline. And it got such a great reaction on the night. Banksy brought a couple of his footy mates. They were in the drinking section. It just made for this amazing atmosphere and this wonderful payoff to this storyline. Full credit to Shippy that just he was the one that brought the whole idea together. And all I thought was, hey man, I want to steal off that a little bit or a lot. I want to steal off that a lot and bring that character over to be with me. And in turn, I hope that, my in-ring and my timing and the way I set up things, that all those things in time will also help him. And he'll be involved in things that mean more because my name's attached to him.
Yeah. I now you're saying that this was just a mid-card thing, but it's firing on all cylinders. Is it at a point now where it's like, now you're forcing the hand, this thing now has to become the main story going on in APW?
Sure. It was Brad West, Devlin Reeves, and it might have been Nate at the time that was booking, or Nate might have left, and it might have been Slater who was the third man in that combination. But at some point, the guys have made a real focus to get newer, younger guys over. That the focus really went towards, they would have a project at the beginning of every year of, we want so-and-so to be at a championship level by the end of the year. So, Logan Gray, and they handled him perfectly. They also handled him in a way that burnt him out real quick because from day one, he was pretty much in main event angles and storylines. Like, that's a lot of pressure because, EPW has had a reputation for such a long period of time that for this guy who grew up around us as a kid, like just, when he started coming to shows and helping his brother, Chris Bell, he was helping us set the shows up. He was just an 8-year-old kid. And now here all of a sudden, he's a grown-up, athletic, tattooed guy who's just so amazing in the ring, has so much physical charisma in the ring, and just this amazing command of his own body that somebody goes, hey man, you know what we haven't had in probably EPW's whole history? We haven't had a guy who came in on day one and was the guy. And he has something that makes him stand out immediately. So they would have these things of, we're going to push this guy this year. And then the following year, I think it was Gen Zero. They're like, by the end of the year, we want all Gen Zero to the top of the card. I get that role partly because the solution gimmick gets over, and partly because the guys on that team know they can trust me to not put myself first. That when it comes time to put over Logan Gray, when it comes time to put over Michael Morleone, whoever it happens to be, that I will put 100% of the focus on these guys, that I will allow them to have their moment. And, the Logan Gray one was a tricky one because part of it was the interplay between me and him as characters when he was in the Solution. And then on the flip side, the following year, you know, Marcus Pitt is the one that really throws me. And because at the time I'm not in the shape that I was now. My head probably wasn't in the wrestling as much as it is now. Being distracted by two kids, he really was the one that lugged me and Logan on his shoulders and carried us through that feud. Like, he was just, he's such an amazing in-ring worker. Like, there's just, he gets all the credit in the world, and he still doesn't get enough credit. He is an amazing guy to work with. So yeah, you know, in some way, did we force their hand? Probably a little bit, but probably also, Slater, Devlin, and Brad know that they can trust me to do the right thing at the right time. And I think that was probably the most important thing, that they wanted to get these new guys over. And like I said, it just came down to a certain level of trust that they need to have in the person that, you know, I'm not going to be the guy that's arguing finishes or not doing what they ask. I'll back their play 110%.
Awesome, man. And before I throw it back to Jack, I'll just kind of finish. I mean, there's so much more I could talk about with the Solution, but we've already gone an hour and a half at this point. So I just want to ask, you know, how do you feel the conclusion of the group went, and what do you pride yourself on most looking back with it?
I do look back at it with, especially the early times, I look back at it with such fondness, and then the end, I look back with a fair amount of disappointment.
Okay.
That's, you know, there's a bit in the middle where I am fighting for certain things, and Shippy is fighting for certain things, and the booking team is fighting for certain things. And so often we would head into a show where Shippy felt like the ideas, and I agreed with him. Sorry, I shouldn't throw all the hate on him, because I would agree. Me and him had a really strong idea in our heads of where we wanted the storyline to progress, and then we would be told that's going to take too much of the focus off the main thing that we need to push tonight. We can't have you guys doing that.
Okay.
And, you know, we would go and we would fight. And then in the end, we would compromise. And compromise is just a shitty way of saying nobody gets what they want. That
yeah.
we didn't quite deliver on the booking side, and we didn't get what we needed either, because we were trying to play both sides of the fence, and maybe we needed to just commit to what we were being asked for instead of trying to compromise and do what we wanted and what they wanted. And there were some times where just, I think, wrestlers and fans were just kind of left scratching their head going, what the hell just happened there? I don't understand what happened or why that happened. And in mine and Shippy's head, and this is something I very much stress to trainees now, in mine and Shippy's head, the story made sense because we knew where it had gone, what people's motivations were, and where we were going. But the fans don't know that. You're telling this story in your own head, and you go, this makes sense because of this, this, and this. But maybe the fans haven't been subject to step 3 and 4, which have only taken place in my head or in Shippy's head. So we go out there and we do step 5, and a fan goes, how did you get from 2 to 5? That doesn't make any sense. So there were these really disjointed moments. And then in the end, I don't know exactly what happened towards the end, whether, because, you know, we finished up, he got a win over me, and then we kind of wrapped things up, but it never led to anything for him, whether the booking team at the time felt like he wasn't ready to take a step out on his own, whether, you know, a lot of I said part of me pairing myself with him was to hopefully add some credibility to him, and then hopefully that would carry over, whether they felt that hadn't carried over, or that they were concerned about how he would carry the ball by himself, as opposed to when he was in there with me and Richter and the rest of the crew. So like my biggest disappointment is that I wanted the group to form in order to, when we split off, that the individual parts that split off would be more important. And I can't say that for AZ. I can't say that for Jordan Bishop. I can't say that for Shippy. I can't even say that for Richter because, like, you know, he was struggling with injuries at the time. So nothing really came of it for him. Like the guy who was, of all the guys who should have been left standing at the end of it, it shouldn't have been the guy who'd been around for 17 years to then go on and have, you know, I've genuinely had probably the best run of my career since I left the Solution, but that certainly wasn't what it was intended to do. The idea was that at the end of this, all the pieces of the puzzle would come out of it being stronger than what they had been leading into it. And that's probably the most disappointing thing for me. And it does leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth that I never like to lay the blame outside of my own court. So I look back at that period now and say, what did I do wrong that didn't lead to greater success for these guys coming out of it? And, you know, AZ's bounced back really well and is in some sort of career best form as well. But I felt like I could have done more, and maybe through getting blinded by my own vision of what it needed to be, that I've maybe let those guys down.
Oh, and I don't think you have, man. I mean, sometimes these things just happen, and that's just what the circumstances are at the time, you know. I myself as a fan, I was always really confused as to why After Warship beat you after all that story, and then he would, you know, never saw him again on the show. But you know, it's just circumstances. Maybe I don't think you're to blame at all. I think you put your heart into it, and it really gave something really interesting for all these guys that were in the group, something to do. Because what would Richter have done during that time? You know, he was your bodyguard or whatever you want to call it, and you know, so that kept him on the shows. And I just think, overall, looking back for me, you might be disappointed with the ending, but I think it was without a doubt the best angle that I ever saw in EPW history.
Cool. Well, that's important, because I'm glad someone was enjoying it, even if I was at the end of it. I was miserable that I hadn't done the job the way I wanted. I'm glad that it still came off as decent entertainment. So,
and you're probably quite happy to not hear "They Keep Calling Me" fucking
man,
10 times a show.
So
it's a great song. Jack, I'll throw it back to you, and I'm going to go to the toilet while you
Sure.
bring up the next round of questions.
So next round of questions, we're going to talk about you know, the EPW School of Pro Wrestling. You want to sort of talk about the origins of the school, how you came about wanting to sort of open your own school up and help train wrestlers.
Yeah, so I suppose in the beginning it was just necessity that we had a very small group of wrestlers. We knew that we needed to expand, both in order to keep the factory open that we'd leased, but also if we wanted to grow EPW or ECW at the time, we needed more wrestlers. We needed fresh blood. We needed, you know, after shows, you'd always have fans coming up saying, "Hey man, how can we get involved? How can we get involved?" So eventually we come up with the idea of running an open day. First open day is super well attended. And out of that first group, I don't think we've ever managed to get a group like this ever again. Shane Haste, Kyle Steria, Tommy Cartel, James Street, Devlin Reeves. I think Michelle Hasluck was in that group as well. Bobby Marshall. That initial group of trainees is just, there's a list as long as my arm. And, you know, it just becomes this thing of wanting to push everyone to get better, that just you all get behind that first group and you all push each other and you all get a little bit better. And then you have more people knocking on the door saying, "Hey man, can we come in?" Yeah, by all means. And you come and you try to bring them in groups, because like holding a tryout's kind of the best way to do that. That if you can get 3 or 4 or 5 people to come through together, that they can grow and learn together. But if they come through as individuals, it's easier for them to fall by the wayside, because they don't have a partner there to, when they don't feel like training or they're banged up, there's not that person there to check in on them and see how they're doing and pick them up and drag them along to training. That sometimes they just disappear. And then when that becomes the habit of not going, it's easier just to lean into that than it is to force yourself to go to training when you're not really feeling it. So, just over time, you know, Mikey and myself traveling to LA, training at the dojo over there. with Kendo Kashin, Rocky Romero, TJ Perkins, Finn Balor, Carl Anderson, Alex Kozlov. We were just Hartley Jackson, obviously. We were there at a time where just there almost couldn't have been a better time in the history of the dojo for us to be there. That just there was this group of guys who were on their way up, hard workers, great personalities. Everyone just got along like a house on fire. And but to see the level that those guys pushed themselves to, and then come back to Perth with the renewed enthusiasm, and I'm sure the guys hated us coming back from LA because training just cracked up to a whole new intensity. And, you know, just over the years, it continued as the Dynamite Factory. And then eventually new management team, the new management team wanted to move into a nicer facility that we'd always bounced around in Maddington. We'd been at about 4 or 5 different buildings in Maddington. A lot of people lived north, and the guys felt like the market up north in terms of trainees hadn't been fully exposed yet, that we'd been down in the south for long enough, and everyone that we were going to draw to training was probably already training. So we moved north. We got a nice new building. They spent a lot of time and money dressing the place up, getting better mats in there, setting the place up better weight equipment. And then sort of thought at that time, you know, the name, the Dynamite Factory's been around for a long time. Factory doesn't have a great connotation if it's going to be a professional place that you're going to go train and learn. So we tossed a few names around, and EPW School of Pro Wrestling, which if you expand that out, is actually the Explosive Pro Wrestling School of Pro Wrestling. It's quite the mouthful, but yeah, we just call it the EPW School of Pro Wrestling. So we just thought, you know, it's a school, it's a place of learning, and just emphasizing that. And you know, the word factory, when you think of factories, you think of pallets and you think of forklifts and stuff like that. You don't think of professional wrestling in a professional training environment. So it was just time for a bit of a rebrand and a refresh.
Awesome, man. I love that. And I wanted to also just bring up as well, you mentioned Shane Haste being in that first class. Like, how's it been for you watching him grow from being a trainee to now being on Raw?
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's you know, at the time when Shane started and the time when I started, you didn't think that was a possibility. We all dreamed of it. We're all going to be in WrestleMania. We're all going to be the WWE champion. But I don't know that any of us knew what's the pathway to take to get there. And, you know, guys like him and Hartley Jackson and Mikey Nichols, they were guys who went out there and really blazed the trail, that they didn't sit back and just wait and say, if I just train in Western Australia and get good enough, eventually someone's going to knock on my door. That they got overseas, and then once they got overseas, they came home. And when they came home, all they were doing was working to save money to go back to the US. And they go back again and again and again. And, you know, Shane and Mikey were constantly putting themselves in positions where they would have to start at the bottom again. You know, whether you go to a new promotion or you go to a new training school, you start at the bottom again. And to be willing to, at the level they were already at, I'm pretty sure they had already been booked on Ring of Honor, but that they went to Harley Race's school for a bit of a tryout that Harley did every year. And he would have a representative from, I believe back in the day, they used to get New Japan, Noah, TNA, and WWE. And the Noah rep contacted the guys, and then off to the races from there, that they were able to go there, live there. And when, I think it's a completely different thing when you are chasing the dream, but it is part of your life, that you're living here at home in Perth and you're going to work, and then you're going to the gym, and then you have to go to training. It's such a difficult balance to be able to balance that in your social life and everything else. But when you get to go to Japan, and then now this is their full-time profession, that they live there, they train, they keep the dojo clean, and then they go and do shows, and that's it. They can 100% focus on wrestling. You know, once they get to that point, you think, how amazing that someone's been able to make a full-time profession out of wrestling coming out of our school. that's really cool. Full credit to them for everything that they've done. But then, you know, to hear, oh, they've been signed by WWE, like that's just another achievement that those guys can hang on their belts. That and you know, they signed at a time too where they weren't just snapping up every indie talent on the scene just to have them under contract. This was a period where, you know, they weren't NXT hadn't quite become what it's become now. That they weren't just snapping up talent left, right, and center. Like those guys, you know, they were able to get that at a time when contracts weren't flying around. And you know, to be able to for Shane to be able to hang in there and continue to do what he's doing and show up after all these years, you know, he's 18 years into his career, and to show up and put in the work every day and then get the reward of being able to finally make it to Raw, albeit in, you know, pretty extraordinary circumstances at the moment. But to be able to go from little old Perth, Western Australia, the, you know, debatable most isolated capital city in the world, in a place that had no wrestling 9 months before he started training, to get to where he's at is pretty remarkable.
Oh, it's insane. I remember seeing him and Elliot Sexton on Raw a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, man. I was just like, holy shit. Like, I saw these guys wrestle in Perth like multiple times, like not that long ago. So it's just, yeah, it's awesome to see, man. Do you have any funny trainee stories? Obviously, without dropping any names, but from training people? Probably a start.
Look, lots. Some I can't tell for fear of incriminating people.
Of course.
Two funny ones. When Shane first started, to continue to name drop Shane, the guys were sent for a run, and our factory at the time, the initial place we were training, was about 1.5 kilometers from a McDonald's down the road. So if you weren't ready for the guys, you would just say, hey guys, go for a run to Macca's and back. Cool. Shane would always beat everybody back because he's just fit and athletic, and congratulations, Shane. So off they go. Johnny Wimbledon's the first one back. And then a couple more minutes go by, someone else comes back. And then a couple more minutes, and then eventually Shane walks through the door. And Tyler Jacobs, formerly FN Carnage, he was the first guy to confront Shane as he walked through the door. And he said, what took you so long? And he goes, I don't know, man, just not feeling it tonight. He's like, oh, why did Pom beat you? Why did Johnny Wimbledon beat you? He cheated. Carney was an angry man back in those days. So he storms across the factory and gets right up in Johnny Wimbledon's face. And he's like, did you cheat? And he's like, what do you mean? Like, did you cheat? Shane told me you just cheated. Shane now obviously feels like shit because Johnny Wimbledon's about to get it from Carney. He goes, no. I'm sorry. I lied. Carney doesn't bat an eyelid. He goes, outside. Yep. Okay. He goes outside, takes a chair with him. Oh. Carney sits down in this chair and just has Shane do burpees for, I don't know how long. And this was before burpees were just, you know, a tried and tested training technique. This was just something evil Carney had seen somewhere. He's like, I'm just going to make this guy do this until he's dead. And I remember walking outside, and Carney is sitting at Shane's feet, just staring a hole at him as he's doing this. And every time he goes down, he's got to get up right in Carney's face. And every time he gets up, he's more and more exhausted. He must have been at about 80 at the time I walked out there. And Shane's just peeling himself off the mat. Yeah, now that I think of it, you know, it's not that funny, but that was the time Shane lied himself into doing burpees until he was absolutely dead. Lesson was well and truly learnt. I don't know that Shane ever lied to Carney ever again. The other one that comes to mind actually involves Shane as well. And it's not necessarily a training story, but it's just a funny story around the factory. You know, Jag used to come over here regularly, and Jag is basically a god to myself and all the guys that came through at the same time that I did. So Shane sees Jag walk through the door, wasn't expecting him, is super excited to see him, and walks up to come and shake his hand. Jag being Jag, he's a very surly individual. Shane used to carry around a little green cloth that was called Incredible Towel. Anybody who knows Shane knows Incredible Towel. It is this towel that Shane used to carry to the ring all the time. He carried it for years and years and years. This building has an incredibly high roof. Shane walks towards Jag, Incredible Towel in one hand, and puts his other hand out to shake Jag's hand. Jag reaches past it, grabs the towel, and just throws it in the air as high as he possibly can. There is a small hook at the very top of the building hanging from the roof. Somehow, it catches onto that hook and doesn't come down. Shane just has the saddest, "you've just killed my puppy dog" look on his face. Jag just shrugs his shoulders and walks away. So one night we're setting up for a EPW house show, and we're doing all the entranceway, me and Devlin Reeves, and we look, and this is so typical of him. Richter has got a ladder inside the ring. He's got the ladder sitting on top of something. He's climbing this unsteady ladder, as tall and large as he is. He's climbing this ladder. He's got a broom that he's gaffer taped to another broom so that the other stick is hanging up high, and he's climbing up this ladder and trying to fetch Shane's towel off the roof. And somehow he's able to get to the top of this building with this makeshift ladder and double broom combo. He pulls Shane's towel off there. So we try to come up, what are we going to do with it? We're going to film ourselves burning it. What are we going to do that could be funny? As it happens, that night, Devlin is going to wrestle Shane in a match. So Dale walks out before the match. Shane's already in the ring. Dale walks out and then gives it the 1 second, reaches back through, grabs the towel and starts swinging it around. Shane is just shocked. He looks up at the roof. He realizes, oh shit, that's the actual towel. It's gone. They somehow managed to get it down. Devlin cuts a promo on Shane saying, this towel you've been missing this towel for however many months. If you win this match, I'll give you the towel back. But if I win this match, I'll set this towel on fire in front of you.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, Shane knows he's going over. Devlin knows that Shane's going over. And the story has a happy ending. Shane gets his towel back. But that was a hell of a lot of fun.
That is so awesome.
My face hurts from laughing, man. Oh, God.
Only in wrestling, right?
Of course.
I wanted one last thing about the school. Where can people find the school in Perth? What social media websites? Just plug it. Any other information you want to throw out about the school? Do you guys have an open day coming up? Have you guys even opened again since the restrictions? What's been going on with the school?
Yeah, sure. So we've you can find us on Berengara Ave in Malaga or on Hanson Street in Maddington. We're now at two separate venues, one south, one north. Where I think,
wow.
Actually, I probably shouldn't talk about that just yet. But yeah, we're in two venues at the moment. It's been difficult, obviously, managing that through not being able to train. We took our classes online for 11 weeks, and lucky for us, enough of the crew were willing to support us through that period, focusing on promos and psychology and ring gear and entrance music and all the things that you probably don't focus on when you're in there just doing the physical wrestling. So we've had a great period of time just being able to help push this knowledge with all the crew, and they've helped hold the place up in the meantime. Obviously, you still got rent to pay, still got bills to pay. That we had a crew that are enthusiastic enough about wrestling that they were willing to take online classes just like this chat that we're having right now, where we could try and share some information with them that will hopefully start paying off now. So we just went back to contact classes last Saturday. So we are back up and running now, thanks to our wonderful state government. Where can they find us online? They can find us on Twitter at EPW School. Best place to contact us, I think, is probably on Facebook, where you can either look for Explosive Pro Wrestling or you can look for EPW School of Pro Wrestling. But I mean, we're we're really up and about at the moment. Everyone's obviously excited to be back at it. I imagine that there's going to be an open day in the coming weeks. We've just got a class sort of working towards we have levels and grades, and the beginner group are working towards their intermediate graduation at the moment. And I think as soon as we've got that out of the way, we'll be looking at holding an open day. But between the two schools, we are running 8, 9, 10, 11 sessions a week between the two schools. So if people are enthusiastic, and, Shane Haste, Mikey Nichols, Bobby Marshall, Chris Weiss, when these guys started, they were down there 5 nights a week. This is how these guys got to be who they are. They worked. I hate the word talent, and I regularly push this at our school. If you come to the EPW School of Pro Wrestling, you will hear me say how the word talent is overused as an excuse by people who don't want to do the work. That talent is just the ability to show up and do the work more than anybody else. And that's what separates Mikey Nichols and Shane Haste and Chris Weiss and Alex Kingston and Marcus Pitt and Damien Slater. That's what separates those guys, is they have shown up and done the work consistently. It's, in hindsight, do you go, wow, they look really talented? Yeah, they do. They just worked an awful lot harder than everybody else. If people want to come down and work hard, there's no shortage of sessions to get to. They can train 7 days a week if their body will allow them. Come down. We're super keen to spread whatever knowledge about pro wrestling that we can.
Awesome, man. If anyone is listening, EPW is the place to go. Carl, back to you.
Jack, I think maybe you and I should go down to the open day. I mean, I'm gonna be fucking useless, but I want to get you in there, Jack.
Man, I am so small. I think if I was to take a bump, I would probably break my back.
See, Jack's biggest enemy is a strong gust of wind, Dave.
Yeah. Hey, we've all been there.
It has been something I have toyed with the idea in the past. I am still 22 years old. I've loved wrestling. The itch has forever been there to be involved in the wrestling industry, whether it be as a professional wrestler, whether it be anything else. I mean, even doing this right now is kind of, it's not even a contribution to the industry. It's just sort of my way of, having my part in sort of dabbling in wrestling, being able to learn more about the business from a personal standpoint as well. But Carl, back to you.
Right. Well, I know we've taken up a lot of your time so far today, Dave, and really appreciate it. I do, however, have a few more questions.
Absolutely, mate. Go for it.
Cool, bro. I want to know what you miss most about the old days with that core early ECW, EPW roster.
Life was simple, mate. That's what I miss. That Mikey has said it far better than I can. We lived 6 weeks at a time. That was it. There was no focus on, will I get to WWE? There was no focus on how many people will we draw to the next show. There was no focus on, how are my kids going to do at school, or what future prospects do I have in my job or my career. It was, get through that next 6 weeks with as much focus on professional wrestling as possible to get to the next performance, to make that as good as it can be, so that we get the opportunity to have another 6-week build to another show where we do the exact same thing all over again. It was just the simplicity of it all, that we weren't thinking about how do I get a career in pro wrestling, and we weren't thinking about what's best for the long term of explosive pro wrestling. We were just thinking, how do we get to this show, and then how do we contribute the best that we possibly can to pro wrestling when we get to that show, and then hopefully that show is good enough. Then in 6 weeks after that, we will do it all again. It was such a simple time.
Awesome, cool, man. Next question: EPW Reawakening 20 won't be far off next year, I believe.
Yeah.
What would it take to get this to be the year of the ultimate EPW reunion? And what are your thoughts on 20 years of EPW?
The nostalgia thing, it's always a tricky balancing act,
right?
Between wanting to not look back with rose-colored glasses too much, because no one that, like you said, that feeling in that building on that night in 2003, I don't know that we've been able to replicate that ever.
Yeah.
That it's just, it was such a primal feeling back then. And, the wrestling wasn't anywhere. It wasn't shades on what we're turning out now, but it just had a special feeling to it.
Yeah.
So I'm always cautious of looking in the rearview mirror too much, because fans look back at it with those same sorts of memories, and perhaps you cut the legs out of your future by making people look back at something that, if you actually look back, maybe it isn't what you think it is, but it is to you. So yeah, I do love, we do encourage the guys every reawakening. We try to get in touch with the old crew and say, hey, just to remember, the door's always open at training, even if you just want to pop in and say hello. The doors are always open at shows if you want to pop in and just say hello to everyone. That it's really important to me that the stories of Perth pro wrestling past don't get lost from generation to generation. That as guys and girls grow in this industry, that they still know who Slick Rick Sanders was and what he sacrificed so that we could all get to pretend to be fighters and get dressed up in our underwear and fight our friends. And that, the contributions of a Jimmy Payne and a Nate Dooley and a Drake Wallace and a Ferguson Block, they're not lost over the years. That, I don't want to look back and say, did those guys, did a Psycho Fett, has he done as well in ring as the current generation? Absolutely not. But are we here without Ferg's contribution? I don't know. So I never want that part of the story to be forgotten. That
absolutely,
in order for there to be a future, there had to be a past, and it's important that we look back and celebrate the past, but that doesn't make us take the eye off what we have right now. And what we have right now, I think bell to bell, we have a roster that can compete with any roster in this country right now. That, you have the experience like Mikey, Nichols, Damien, Slater, Marcus, Pitt, myself, Bobby Marshall, and then you have this emerging group of guys and girls. And I mean, if you just look at the talent we've lost in the last few years, that, Scotty Ryan's gone and Logan Gray is gone for the moment, and Alex Kingston's currently on the shelf and Richter's on the shelf. You take those four out of any company in this country and you weaken that roster considerably, and then you look down the line now and you have a Delcano and you have a T-Panay and you have a Jack Edwards on the way up, and then you've got a Taylor King, you've got a Julian Ward. That there really is this push of talent coming from the bottom up, and it's such an important thing to have. I left out the guy who more than anyone I want to throw down with in a big match at the moment, or two guys that I want to throw down in a big match. Gavin McGavin, who I have lined up for whenever we get out of this COVID era, and the guy who I think in that group pushing through that I really want to get my hands on is Dan Steele. That me and him have a little bit of a history going back even to a old school Schwa championship match. But he has come on in leaps and bounds in that time, and I feel like I've come a long way in that time also. And I think we had a little stoush in a tag match going back a few months, and I was very happy with how that felt and looked, and I would very much like for us to get our hands on each other again. I'm pumped, man. When I think about Perth wrestling and where it's at, and still every show we had last year, I think everyone left it going, oh, that was a really good show, but no wrestler ever really came back through the curtain saying, yeah, man, that felt good. Every single one of them came back through the curtain going, that was okay. I can do better than that. And knowing that those guys can feel that confidence growing and they feel they're capable of so much more, it makes me super excited for what's to come next.
Cool, man. I've just got, I think it's 3 more questions.
Yeah, man.
As the years go by, I see things like, this Undertaker documentary, and it made me think about, what you're 20 years in now. What would you want to be your exit strategy, and how would you like to go out when that time comes?
Selfishly, I would, if they're interested in wrestling, I would like to hand over to my kids. My son is 9 now. So potentially, if he wanted to, he's 9 to 10 years away from maybe being ready to wrestle in ring. My daughter's almost 7. So she's probably about 11 to 12 years away from being ready to be in ring if she wanted to. If they want to, I would like to hand over to them.
That'd be awesome.
If
Cool.
they don't, you'll have to drag me kicking and screaming, I reckon, man. Like, just, I don't, there were times where I think I missed it I missed it in a different way. It's kind of hard to explain. I just feel like, every time I have a great performance, and I felt like my last one was, and I felt like my last one before that was, that I just want to go until I'm not putting quality out, if you know what I mean. Because I feel like you get a little bit better every time you go out there. And when I feel, and I've spoken to a bunch of guys and said, hey man, the second you see me take that turn, you're going to have to be honest with me and just tell me. So, I hope to just continue putting out quality work for the moment. And when I feel like I can't do that, because physically I feel fine at the moment. And it's just a case of whether or not I can match my experience. If my body holds up, then my experience should continue to help me get better. But if the body starts to deteriorate, that might be where I have to pull the pin. Yeah, I'm not sure. Outside of the perfect handing over to the next generation scenario, I'm not sure what the perfect scenario would be.
Cool, man. So all the stuff with your head is okay these days, and the trauma that you had a while back, is that non-existent now?
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten progressively ditzy as the years go on, but I think I credit that more to just an accumulation of information between my ears, mate. That just you can only hear and remember a certain amount of things before things start to get a little bit shaky up in the head, mate. So I feel fine. I'm able to, obviously I can run my mouth for a couple of hours at a time. So the mind mouth connection is still strong. But yeah, I feel good at the moment. The body feels good. I've got a long-standing right shoulder issue, but it's more just something that sneaks up on me. I've just got a bit of tightness in my trap that it's more stress related than anything, whether it's physical stress or emotional stress. But yeah, look, man, the head's fine.
Cool.
I run around in circles sort of chasing my tail, but I think for the most part, the person who finds my head issues most annoying is Michelle, who has to try and have conversations with me.
And last question before we get to a little segment that I like to call 5-Second Frenzy, is what advice have you received over the years that helped you the most?
As a wrestler, I think the most important bit of information I got, the best bit of advice was the one from Cole that I mentioned earlier, which was shut your mouth and get to work. That wrestling is a long, hard grind to get good at. And, there's no guarantees in any art form that you throw yourself into. There's no guarantees of any sort of payoff. That just you have to be willing to do the work, and just wrestling's not always going to pat you on the back and tell you that it loves you. But regardless, on those days, you need to show up and get to work, or the day when the opportunity does come, you're not going to be ready for it. And life advice, there's a Jack Cornfield quote, and I won't be able to nail it exactly, but pretty much he said, We must do work, or in our case, art. We must do art for art's sake, not for the attention or the applause or the gratitude. We need to do it because that expression is there within us and it means something to us, and not because we want attention for it, or not because we want money for it, or not because I hate the word deserve. I can't stand it. I understand that some people work harder than other people. Life doesn't work that way. There are so many factors that play a part of it. Timing plays a part of it. Relationships play a part of it. If there was just this rule that if you just got in a room and worked harder than everybody else, that you would get more than anybody else. There are people who do manual labor jobs who would have more money than any of us, because I can tell you that there are people out there working harder than any of us. That there's no guarantees. You just need to follow your nose as much as possible, lean into the things that you're passionate about, without worry of, am I going to be $1 million rock star, or am I going to be $1 million wrestler, or where is this life going to lead me? Just do the things you enjoy for the sake of doing it, because it's what you love, it's what you enjoy. And at the end of the day, when you're lying on your deathbed, you'll go, fuck, I lived a pretty good life, man.
Yeah. Sweet as, man. All right, so 5-second frenzy.
Uh-oh. My mind doesn't work that quick.
That's probably, we should probably think about retooling this segment, Jack, because a lot of wrestlers need more than 5 seconds to answer a question.
Good point.
These are just some fun questions, just to learn a little bit more about you and some of the typical things that you love.
Cool.
So we'll start off with, what's your favorite musical artist?
Ooh, give me Paul Dempsey.
Excellent. Favorite TV show?
Oh, goodness. At the moment, Ozark.
Good show.
Okay.
Great show.
Favorite film?
This definitely isn't my favorite film, but it is a nice, easy film that I enjoy watching that hits me in the feels. I'll go with Remember the Titans.
Oh,
but
fuck yeah.
if I can just run with a theme, I generally like movies that are set in reality, that punch you in the chest and leave you feeling at the end of it, rather than a sci-fi or a superhero movie or something that's surrealist or not based in reality. I like things that give you a boring human emotion. Was it Marriage Story? Was that the one with oh god, what's his name? The guy who Driver, is that his name?
Ryan Gosling.
Not Ryan Gosling.
Hang on. What's it called again? Marriage Story.
Yes, I'm sure that's what it's called.
I'll just Google it.
See how I've managed to make this 60-second frenzy?
Yeah.
Adam Driver.
Adam Driver. There you go. Yeah.
Got that in the end.
Sorry, I think Gosling was in a movie called Driver. But anyway, keep going.
Okay. But yeah, that movie is my kind of movie. You leave it going, oh god, like humanity is all kinds of wonderful and awful, and I don't know how to feel about myself.
Cool. I'll download that illegally later on. What's your favorite food?
Burgers.
Yep.
Sick. Favorite opponent?
I can't go past Marcus Pitt.
Awesome. Your favorite match you've ever had? I know that's
probably my EPW championship match with the Don Michael Morleone last year, where the build was all around me wanting to win the belt one more time for my kids, and then being a loser, and then my son coming into the ring afterwards and giving me a hug. It was the most special moment I've had in a wrestling ring, and just happened to come on the back of a really, really good match.
That's very nice. Favorite alcoholic beverage? I know you said that you don't drink, but this is what's in the question. So,
damn. Look, I used to be a straight Southern Comfort drinker.
Cool. Favorite female body part?
Ooh, eyes.
Well, that's
excellent.
An interesting one.
We're getting some different answers. Jack. Godfather said titties. Alan Funk said ass. Scott Hudson said brain. And now we're getting eyes. Very nice. Very nice.
Titties are hard to go past.
And lastly, what is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
There we go.
Sweet as. Jack, have you got anything else to say?
Nothing other than a thank you for your time. Obviously, this has gone much longer than any of us anticipated it to, but I think it's been absolutely awesome to sort of hear from you directly, your perspective on everything that's happened. You know, as I said, when I was a teenager, EPW was something I went to very often with my dad and a couple of my mates. So sort of be able to hear all these stories come directly from you and talk directly with you about all this sort of stuff has been absolutely awesome, and can't thank you enough for your time.
No, thank you for having the interest to even reach out and ask the questions, guys. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Dave. And, you know, and I want to sign this off by saying that I truly believe that this planet is a better place because Dave Farley exists.
Oh, thank you, man. That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're a hell of a human being. And again, as Jack has said, and I'm saying right now, thank you very much for your time. And hopefully we can do another one of these because there's more stuff we could probably cover.
There's a few more stories from 20 years, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Jack. And you were all watching the 55 Live podcast here on the WZWA Network. And it has been a fun conversation. And I want to thank everyone out there for checking this out here today. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.